Okay, everyone, welcome to Unsafe Space Book Club. I'm your host, Carter Laren. I'm sorry we've got some technical issues. We are now on a different URL than we were beforehand. So we're going to wait for some people to come in, and we're going to try and go. I'm going to go send them chat messages in chat to tell them what the new URL is. So hold on for a second, and then we'll begin our book club. Although, while I'm doing that, I will get my face off the camera so you guys can see Carrie and everyone else.
Yeah, we have a
There's
big
Carrie.
group today. I'm excited. So we have almost enough people to play two games of Hollywood Squares with entirely different people. Um, this month we read Screwtape Letters, which I was saying when we first tried to do this and we weren't broadcasting, that several people had recommended to me, and I was really excited to finally get to read it. It's not too long of a read. I enjoyed it. Carter, I know, did not. I'm very curious to hear why, because I think even if you're not a Christian, somebody in the live chat was just saying that this book to them offered a really interesting glimpse into human psychology and the way that we work, the way that we convince ourselves of certain things and want to maybe engage in self-delusion about things. And so I am curious to hear about why he didn't enjoy it. But why don't we go around while he's giving people the new link? If anybody wants to give me their first thoughts, I know Christina had some, so maybe we start with you.
Okay, so for the people who just got in, this is one of my favorite books. I'm always buying used copies and giving them to people because I think it really captures how evil behaves to try to keep you from thinking about whether things are true or not, and how it keeps you from focusing on things that don't make you a better person, but really kind of make you party to evil that you otherwise wouldn't be party to.
The book
Yeah,
reminds me of, like a scene that we see sometimes in movies or wherever, where you have like the little angel on one side whispering in your ear, you have to do this, and then you have like the little devil here on the other side telling you boo boo, and they're both playing for the mind and that person, right? And
there
obviously
was
that
there was one part of it, Manny, that really made me think of that, where he was saying, I can hear myself on feedback a little. Okay, it's gone. Where he was saying that he can't hear what the enemy is saying to the patient, the patient being the human.
yeah.
He couldn't tell what the enemy was saying, but he figured he was saying something like blah blah blah, because then I said to the patient da da da, and I successfully pulled him away. And it made me think of what you're saying, the
Yeah,
idea of having a little angel and a little devil in each side of your head, you know. Anybody else have any first thought?
I think a lot of people have.
Um,
I'm just trying to figure out Zoom. Am I on? Because I don't know.
Yes.
Okay, so for me, my daughter's actually in here, Caitlin. It started in a conversation we were having in the kitchen about social justice and COVID and all that stuff. And I was saying, like, man, it's like, they just don't even want to hear truth anymore. And it's just nonsense after nonsense. And I think I even said jargon. And then she's like, wait, I'll be right back. And she ran up and grabbed the book, and I hadn't read it. And she brought it down, and like first letter, I was floored. I was like, that's it. I'm reading this entire book cover to cover. So that's how, and then I sent it to Carrie, and here we are.
you're the one. You're the first person who told me I should read this. So thank you, little ragamuffin.
Yeah.
I think everyone has the link, by the way, now,
Yeah,
so
cool.
we're good.
Allison, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah, so I found this really interesting because I read this in high school and I was raised Christian. I'm no longer Christian, but so I read it as a Christian in high school, thinking about it as kind of C.S. Lewis intended from that perspective, and then rereading it now from more of a lens of like social justice, like SJW gone wrong, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting. I just felt like I got so much more out of it this time. And I think like for me, a lot of kind of going into like with the psychology of it, of like getting people to doubt themselves. Like I think a lot of what I got out of this was how often, like it just sounds like how you think in your head, like you're your own little devil where you just like doubt your own insight and thoughts. And then when you're in the company of certain people, you kind of like self-censor. And I think that is like, that's natural. That happens anyway. But I think we're in a time of history when that's like everywhere. And I got a lot out of that. So that's my first impression.
Someone in chat is suggesting that we do a quick synopsis for people who haven't read the book. So would someone like to just describe what this is about? Because the literary device is unusual.
I can try it. All right, so I would say imagine you've got a person who is going through life and needs a little bit of guidance, and they don't have any guidance that they know of, but there's an angel and a devil on their shoulder, kind of like what Manny was referring to. Now, in the book, we don't hear anything from that angel. All we hear is a letter from one of the devil's bosses who is trying to teach this young demon how to take this person, which he refers to as the patient, and push him away from the light into the dark. So if you were this young demon trying to learn how to push somebody towards the darkness, you would maybe have daily or weekly letters and correspondence to somebody, and that somebody would then tell you, well, you're doing this right, you're doing this right, you're doing this wrong. So during the time of World War II, early on, but when it was just the European War, before we referred to it as World War II, man's living in London and he's going through life. He's meeting a girl. He's getting involved in church, and he's going through a few of these steps on his way towards what they call the light, or towards their enemy. So this demon is corresponding back and forth, and we get to sneak in on those correspondence as if we're that person or that young demon learning how to take someone towards the darkness and hearing the feedback from their boss. So every letter is a bit more feedback, and we get to learn about what's going on in that patient and that person's life, and all of the things that we're doing wrong that are pushing him towards the light instead of towards the darkness, and how to switch that around.
That was
Thanks,
a great
Thomas.
synopsis. Thank you.
Very good.
Any other first thoughts before we jump into specifics? Any of the new people? Keith, what about Keith, the hat guy?
All right, I'll chime in. I was waiting for the people that are religious to weigh in first. I knew nothing about the book. I had heard of it, but I did not know what it was. And I have read some other C.W. Lewis. The beginning annoyed me a little because it was a puzzle, and I don't particularly like puzzles. I did puzzles for a living. I don't like puzzles anymore. So it was like trying to figure out what was going on. I'm like, this is weird. It intrigued me a little bit. Like somebody said, the first chapter kind of hooked them. So the first chapter did hook me the way a detective story was. And I did switch to, I was using the John Cleese that was posted on the club. So I was glad I did that. This one comment, this is the first book club book that I was able to do other stuff entirely through every part of it. When I tried to use the audio versions of other books and clean the bathroom, I would have to stop and go back, and listen again, because I'd start missing something, even for a simple task. So this one, I went for walks. I worked in the apartment stuff. Anyway, once I figured out what it was, it became a little more interesting, but that took me 3 or 4 letters before I really understood it. It was interesting in some of the quotes that were in it. I like the part where he talked about, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, we have to make sure that we don't succumb to our own propaganda. I like that one. That was one worthy of writing down. But overall, I wouldn't read it again. I don't know that I would recommend it to somebody. I wouldn't have minded if it ended different. I'm not religious, by the way. But it was interesting trying to see how people think, and I've spent my whole life trying to understand how religious people think. So it was interesting from that sense.
Was there anything in it that, as a non-Christian, was there anything in it though that resonated with you as in terms of human psychology or human behavior, even though it was coming from,
Definitely, yes. I like some of the analogies made, and that did make me think. Like, for an example, he said that, well, first he would use like sexual debauchery, like just, not having any love involved with sex, like that would work. But if that didn't work, then marrying a good Christian girl might work too, It's a little more complicated, it's a little harder, but that might work too. I thought that was kind of funny. I don't really think that's true, but it was funny that they try to use that. There's a little bit of truth behind some of the humor like that. Like marriage could drive people crazy. And
there were a lot of cases where I think he was sort of pointing out how the things that we think of as safe or that we consider virtuous about ourselves or maybe take pride in can be our tripping points. So a good example of that is the part where he's talking about people taking pride in our own humility, which I'm like, that you can see that in every human, whether they're religious or not. That's a temptation you can fall into. Like, I'm so humble, or I'm so unselfish. And I kind of like that little turning things around like that a bit. Okay, Carter.
Michael Scott quote.
How about, I'm so caring. I care so much about you that I'm going to wear a mask and you should wear one too.
Yes.
Like, that's what I was getting through the whole thing, was current events, like crazy.
Yeah.
You reminded me of, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
You reminded me of a part that was so good that I wrote it down, because it was talking about like the selfishness of people that are claimed to be so unselfish. She's the sort of woman who lives for others. You can always tell the others by their hunted expression.
Yes. Cecil, that's a great quote. Is your name Cecil?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for pulling that one out. By their hunted expression. Okay, I need to know, Carter. I need to know what you don't like about it. I'm gonna mute myself.
I mean, I don't disagree that there's bits of like interesting human psychology stuff that I like, Keith. Like, honestly, my biggest problem was I was just bored out of my mind. It was just so boring. I haven't read a book this boring in, I can't remember ever. And I'm not trying to be a jerk. I just like, and my preface here is like, I can read and appreciate books based on religious themes. Like Crime and Punishment was great. 93 was great. Even Gracie's Breathing in Water, which had like a religious theme through it. And she's not, she's not a C.S. Lewis level fiction writer. I mean, I love her, but she's not a C.S. Lewis level fiction writer. She's not a famous fiction writer. I appreciated that book and liked it. And I can appreciate fiction that's like religious fantasy even. Like Neil Gaiman's Good Omens. I didn't read the books, but I watched the series. Like, it's about an angel and a devil, and like, I loved it. I was super interested in it. It was fun. Golden Compass is kind of like that, right? So it's not that the religion doesn't bother me. I just didn't care about the patient at all. And I didn't care. Obviously, you're not supposed to care about Screwtape or Wormwood, so I didn't. But ultimately, I was just kind of bored, and I felt like, okay, if you're a Christian, you might get excited about the idea of it because it's kind of an interesting literary device, which I agree with. But to me, although the premise was interesting as a non-Christian, there was like nothing compelling beyond that, and I kind of felt like I was reading scribblings of like an MK Ultra patient who'd been in a psych ward for 30 years and was convinced he was seeing ghosts, and like, here's what's going on behind the scenes, and Nurse Ratched is doing this, and there's a demon over here. It's like, I don't.
Okay, let me interrupt for 1 second. The patient, I mean, I didn't care about the patient either. If you're thinking of the patient as like a character in a film, we don't really.
Well, I don't know who I was supposed to care about.
The patient is me. Like, did you not view yourself as the patient?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
But and I think some context too is these were never one whole story. So if we were looking for some kind of story arc, and I get what you're saying, Carter, because at the end, I wasn't really sure what happened to the patient. I think he died in the bombing, and since he's
I assume
dead,
he died, but in a
yeah,
good
he's
way
dead.
died, right?
yeah. Oops, he died in a good way.
Yeah.
But these were every single individual letter was um, printed at once by itself in I don't know if the Atlantic was a weekly or monthly publication, but here's letter one, and then maybe a month later. So if we're looking for a whole arc, then we're probably going to be really disappointed because it was published all separate letters.
Yeah, but I
throughout
mean,
months
Arthur
and
Conan
months.
Doyle did that with Sherlock Holmes, and there's still a story that I care about. like,
Yeah.
to me, evaluating it as fiction, it failed. And then when I evaluate it as nonfiction, I didn't think it was super insightful. I felt like the categories of insights were either pretty obvious, slightly contrived, or just wrong. Like he seems to have a lot of admiration for Immanuel Kant, who I think is one of the worst philosophers in the history of philosophy. And he praises Christian socialism. He kind of argues that the only problem with social justice is that it should be a means, not like a means to, like it's part of Christianity, but you can use social justice by inverting the hierarchy and making people think social justice is the end and Christianity is the way. But he's not anti-social justice. He actually is for Christian socialism, which is in the book. Like,
Wait a minute,
there's not a lot of stuff here.
I didn't take
understand
that.
what that meant either.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's in the book. The
Where?
demons don't like Christian socialism. So I assume that everything they don't like, I'm supposed to think is great. Right?
Yeah, I remember that.
The dangerous phenomenon called Christian socialism was rampant. He's talking about like the Marxist revolution didn't happen because these damn Christians got to be Christian socialists, and that's the big problem for the devils. So
Wait a
it sounds
minute.
like God's all about Christian socialism.
So in the beginning, he says these letters are from the devil, the demon, and he's a liar, and we can't take that for truth as well. So like
but then I get questioning
Wormwood
the narrator. I get the questioning the narrator thing, but you can't question the narrator to that level. Otherwise, all of the advice that he says.
You can.
You can.
Let her talk.
Then the book's meaningless.
Let her talk.
Okay, so Screwtape's writing to Wormwood. We never see Wormwood's stuff. He's telling Wormwood what he wants to tell him. He doesn't care if he fails, and he doesn't care if he wins, because either way, he's food. He's bringing him food. He's bringing him either the human, which is society, right? Like it's us, and we're in this battle. So this socialism, this whatever, it's not. I don't know. To me, it's like faith equals, meaning, and social justice is the means to grab people and bring them in, like what they're doing now. They're all over the churches, and they're using them. He's using it.
But he's saying no, but he puts it in the enemy's camp. He puts social justice as something the enemy likes, and he puts Christian socialism. He casts it in the light of something the enemy likes.
Okay, but I'm struggling to know where that you're finding that. So if you can take the time.
I mean,
let me just read. Okay, but tell me. Hold on. Can we all catch up? Oh my gosh. So I'm in letter. I just want to read. I'm in letter 23. So if anybody wants to read, this is one part I wanted to point out, and then I would love for you to tell me the part you're talking about so I can reread it, because I'm just not clear on what you're talking about. So anyway, in letter 23, I did like where he's saying towards the end, he says, on the other hand, we want very much to make men treat Christianity as a means, preferably, of course, as a means to their own advancement, but failing that, as a means to anything, even to social justice. The thing to do is to get a man at first to value social justice as a thing which the enemy demands, meaning that God demands, and then work him onto the stage at which he values Christianity because it may produce social justice. So I really liked that part, because that's what I see happening in a lot of the churches that are adopting social justice ideology, is that social justice is becoming above, it's like above the gospel, and they're using the church almost to pursue this other ideology, and they're using twisting the word of God in any way necessary to pursue this particular ideology. It could probably be done. You could twist Christianity to pursue any other kind of belief system, but I see that right now happening. So I liked that part. Now, where's the part you're talking about? So, because maybe
even the part that you're talking about,
okay,
that part is not a indictment of social justice. It's a recognition that the social justice is an end goal of the end. It's part of what the enemy's plan is social justice. That's a good thing, but you can't confuse the means with the ends. And he's saying if we invert the means and ends, i.e., social justice is a means, but Christianity is the ultimate ends. If you invert them, that's a way that we can get this guy's soul. We can eat at this guy's soul because he's inverting them. He's using Christianity as a means even to social justice, which is a good thing in the enemy's eyes.
It doesn't say
right?
It's a good thing it says the thing to do. Yeah, I didn't read that. It says the thing to do is to get the man. No, it's not.
No, they'll use anything.
It doesn't matter.
They use anything. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't. He doesn't say anything. He says even social justice.
Okay. He also says cards are just as good as murder. Like, we don't care if he is a gambler or whatever. He doesn't care. It doesn't matter. Either one is good.
I understand he can use
anything.
anything.
It's good.
I understand he can use anything, but what he did was he lent legitimacy to the idea that social justice is a noble thing.
No, he didn't. He did not. He did not.
Nope, nothing's noble. They don't care about nobility.
Obviously, they don't. I'm speaking in reverse because we're talking about the demons. I don't think I have to explain that. Yes, the demons didn't say yay social justice. They said ooh social justice. That's like
some of the times
he did have a go at Rousseau.
Huh?
He did say that Rousseau was good, and Rousseau is basically
yes. Thank you.
Okay, where's that part, Stephen?
In reverse, he said, "Oh, that's in the right at the end in the last one."
Oh, thank you. Okay, I'm skipping ahead.
And Caitlin, you were trying to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say, I think sometimes when the demons are speaking to you, they don't have an understanding of what is good at all, because there's also points where he's talking about like love, and he can't understand why this Christian household loves each other. He's like, love isn't real. This doesn't exist. So I think like his perception is also skewed.
I got, but he made that very clear that the demons don't understand love, right? And here's my pushback on the argument that like, well, they're demons, so you can't trust anything they say. If you're trying to take advice from this about these are tools demons use, and these are the demons' goals, and this is what they want, then you have to take that at face value. You can't just arbitrarily say, well, this thing I disagree with, the fact that social justice is presented in a positive light. Well, that's just the demon lying. But the other stuff the demon's saying is not the demon lying. Like, there's no evidence for that in the letter that you can't, like, well, if you have an untrusted narrator, you can't just pick and choose what you trust from the narrator to like, oh, I like this thing over here, but not this other thing. Don't worry, he's not liking social justice. Because why?
Well, first of all, I don't even agree with you that he's painting that social justice as something that God thinks is noble. So we have a very stark disagreement on what the book is even saying about what God thinks about social justice. I didn't take that from it at all. And
well, as Stephen pointed out, though, he mentions Rousseau as well.
And what does that mean? What quote? And show me how that means that he's saying God is yay for social justice.
Well,
when I read this, there are things that are fashionable at any point in history, and like right now, social justice is fashionable, and there are people who can't imagine you being against it or thinking it's a bad thing. In fact, we come up against this all the time. When I talk about how I'm opposed to social justice, I will have people who say to me, I mean, they just can't fathom it. They're like, why would you be opposed to something that's for equality and for fighting racism and sexism? Because they believe what it is on face value. So do you know what I mean? So I think he's trying to say, even when he says even social justice, it's like even something that you take to be good. Okay.
Let me quote the next sentence.
Okay.
The thing to do is to get a man at first to value social justice as a thing which the enemy demands.
Right.
And then work on him at the stage which he values Christianity. because it may produce social justice. He is linking Christianity and social justice very
No,
clearly.
he's not. No, he's not. He's telling you we are trying to get you to think it's something that God demands. We want you first to think. First, we have to get you to think it's something God demands, and then we have to get you to put it above God's word.
Right. Screwtape isn't interested in whether or not God actually does command social justice. What he wants is for the patient to think that God is commanding social justice. If you look at when he talked about, should we make him a pacifist or a patriot? He didn't care, and he didn't say whether God wanted the patient to be a patriot or a pacifist.
Right. That I agree with.
What?
He doesn't care.
Right. And I also think you're conflating our 2020 social justice with what Lewis would have meant in the early 1940s, where he might have simply meant giving alms.
Yeah, it's not clear that's a good point. It's not clear what he meant, because the original phrase social justice wasn't exactly what it is now. So that I'll concede. But I am going to point out the praise for Christian socialism, which is it's actually in the Toast. So I didn't realize it was in the Toast.
Well,
but
at that time in the UK, socialism was very popular.
Right. And he's saying the dangerous phenomenon called Christian socialism was rampant. This is the demon calling it a dangerous phenomenon. So presumably we're supposed to infer from this that this is a good thing, that Christian socialism is good. And he has on page 195 in this copy, he has a whole thing about Christian socialism. So my only point is just, as a fiction book, I was bored, and as a nonfiction book, I didn't think there was a lot of deep philosophical or human psychological insights that weren't really they didn't need to be presented this way, and it wasn't really a helpful way to present them to me. It was just kind of like, here's some random stuff, and then there was these kind of things, which I guess we could argue over whether social justice is good or bad, but why not just be clear about what it is you're trying to say? It seems like he's just dancing around it. So
I guess I just didn't read it that way, so we completely took different things from it. Where's the Toast? What do you mean by the Toast? There's a preface.
You didn't read it, Carrie? The Toast is awesome. The Toast is at the very end
last.
of that
After-
copy.
No,
After
I don't have.
31.
He wrote it 15 years after the book.
Oh, I
or
don't
something
have
like
that. I don't have that.
Oh, you
Like
don't.
a
You
He's
have,
addressing.
Go back and read it later.
Yeah, he's addressing the the graduates, the demon graduates, and he's giving them the toast, like, you're moving on and whatever. And he's talking about the corruption in education and everybody's a winner. You all get trophies and that type of mentality, and how they're taking away individualism. And it's really great. Definitely
I have
read
a
it.
really old book that I found at a thrift store. So this is why. Okay, this whole time I'm like, what are you talking about? Christian socialism.
Sorry.
And
I didn't realize it. I just had I had like a little
Okay.
thing. I didn't realize it was like in the Toast section of the book.
Okay.
But
Yeah, that's where
I have a question.
About.
Christina was asking who's Christian and who's not. Who in this audience is not Christian? And what I want to hear from, like, I know what Keith thinks about the book, and Keith's not Christian.
I am not a Christian.
All right, Stephen, tell us what you think about the book.
I don't know if my level of comprehension of it is that high, but I'm like you. I'm favorably disposed towards Christianity. I think it's a reasonable approach to looking at human nature. But I don't have a lot to say really, because I don't know if it really sunk in. It might be because I don't have the right background.
What about anyone? Who else said they? Thomas.
So I mentioned to Carter, I think we were on a meeting a while back, that I did grow up in the Christian church, was asked to leave when I kept asking too many questions about dinosaurs. My grandmother was asked not to bring me back. And I went through that whole Charles Dawkins phase and all that kind of stuff. But I do also believe that, as Stephen put it, it's a very valuable way to look at the world, So depending on what you mean by Christian, by action, I don't believe in the metaphysical aspects of it, but I think there are a lot of great things in Christianity, and much of it is true, but just written in a language that is incredibly ancient. But I did take a lot of things away from the book, somewhat what Allison was saying, where there's a lot of psychological things where I kept picking away at, like, yeah, this is exactly what's happening, and maybe a little bit deeper than others thought it was. So let me give you an example of why. So we talk a lot about postmodernism and that evolution from postmodernism into the critical theories. And some of the basis underneath all of that is the idea of different manners of knowing. So there is no objective truth. Everyone has their own lived experience. And the book says on 2 different occasions how important it is to make people believe things like that. So this was in letter number 14. The great thing is to make him value an opinion for some quality other than truth, thus introducing an element of dishonesty and make-believe into the heart of what otherwise threatens to become a virtue. So believing in something, not because it's true, but because it feels good or it's popular. And I think that is exactly one of the biggest problems. It's an epistemic, is that right, Carter?
Sure.
Yeah, so the idea of what is and what isn't true, and how we assess knowledge. And I think to have someone write something like that in the 40s and see what's happening today, what's 70 years later, I thought that was incredibly insightful, and amongst many other things. So regardless of my feelings about the metaphysics behind burning bushes and reincarnation and things like that, I kept picking up on things like that passage that really spoke to exactly the road we traveled down to get where we are here today.
I think you have to understand, not have to, but I think one thing that might be helpful to understand, and this is maybe why I'm not super impressed with the book, even from a nonfiction perspective, is he does explicitly, I won't say explicitly, but pretty explicit if you know what he's talking about. He explicitly praises Immanuel Kant, and if you understand what the way that, so if you also look in the book, there's some confusion about how they value reason, because there's some points at which, like, they're arguing that if you're rational, then that's the enemy is the one that's rational, and we have to interject irrationality. And then there's other points where it seems like the reverse is true. And I think the way to tease that out is to understand that C.S. Lewis appears to, I'm not a C.S. Lewis historian, but based on this, he appears to really like Immanuel Kant. And one of the horrible things that Kant did metaphysically was to separate reason from having any from having any effect on actual reality. So he argued that there was a phenomenal world for which reason was very valuable, and a noumenal world, which is where ethics and everything else come from, and where God comes from. I mean, there's a famous quote, I found it necessary to, give up or something, suppress, I forget the word, reason in order to make room for faith. So what he does is he comes up with his categorical imperatives. He argues that this is the only reality. It's these categorical imperatives. They're separated from the reality that we all know. That's the real reality. That's where ethics is. That's where God is. But your reason is impotent to deal with that reality in any way. He undercuts reason in Critique of Pure Reason. And so I think C.S. Lewis has this view of reason epistemologically, that it's fine for dealing with the phenomenal world, but impotent in the noumenal world. And that confusion we're seeing is sometimes he's talking about the phenomenal world, and sometimes he's talking about the noumenal world. That's my guess.
No, that's not where Lewis was.
Sorry, what?
That's not how Lewis thought. He definitely,
I don't know, I'm guessing.
He definitely believed that logic will lead you to faith, and that part of what faith is clinging to reason in the face of emotion.
I want to
Why
chime
did he
in on
praise
that.
Kant,
like,
then that's kind of a weird thing to do.
I don't know, Stephen.
I was going to mention that Jonathan Haidt sees morality as being axioms, so they don't really come from reason. Our moral views don't come from reason; they come from something that's the evolution put there, and then that becomes the axioms that we reason about.
I think he's trying to be more descriptive though than philosophical, right? He's more of an evolutionary, like he's looking at it descriptively. This is what we consider morals. I don't think Jonathan Haidt would argue this is what morals should be. He's just saying this is what they are, right?
Yeah, and I think there's probably a lot of morals that each individual person isn't able to articulate in a reasoned fashion, but that doesn't necessarily mean we can't put reason into them. So we probably evolved a lot of these things because they make sense. And in retrospect, we can say, well, we can also apply reason to them as a judge of whether or not we should continue with them.
Huh. Well, I guess I'm wrong though. According to Christina, I'm wrong about C.S. Lewis's epistemology. I don't know why then he calls Kant a great, quote, great human philosopher. But
so from the comments, Tamara said to go back to what Thomas was talking about truth and how he points out, the great thing is to make man value an opinion for some quality other than truth, thus introducing an element of dishonesty. Tamara says, I just want to read her chat since she can't join us on video. The argument that 2 + 2 = 5, if an officially oppressed person says they feel it is true, then you can believe anything at that point and deny the truth because you consider it immoral. And truth sounds like hate to those who hate the truth.
Yeah, that I do love that quote, by the way. I think that was a great.
In that same chapter, Thomas, I also liked, I think that was the chapter, one of the ones where he talked about humility and taking pride in humility. And I liked the part about how he said, by this method, thousands of humans have been brought to think that humility means that pretty women trying to believe they are ugly and clever men trying to believe they are fools. And he sort of talks about this false humility that I think we see a lot on social media. And he gets to this thing I really like about, how he says God, the enemy, wants to bring the man to a state of mind in which he could design the best cathedral in the world and know it to be the best and rejoice in the fact that it's the best without being any more or less or otherwise glad at having done it than he would be if it had been done by another. I thought that was really cool. That sort of, it's not this prideful, boastful thing. And it's also not this false humility, like, oh no, you're too kind. Like, I'm not all, it's just a statement of fact. Like, yeah, I did this and it was cool. And I would be equally joyful if you did it. And,
that
let's move on.
reminded me, when I read that reminded me of Ayn Rand. And I'm sorry, Carter, I don't know if you would agree with this, but help me. Well, and I've read a lot of Rand, and I think you read a bit more than I have, and maybe Keith can help on this. But when I read that portion, I couldn't help but think of her because I kept thinking of an architect who creates for the sole purpose of their ability to create without any regard to what anyone else would think. And that's part of what I always think of Rand to be, that her idea of selfishness and objectivity seem to be tied into that very, very well.
I think you're right. And she would call that she uses the word selfish a little bit differently than other people do, right? So that would be her.
Exactly.
That will be her like a selfish thing for her.
Stay
that would be
true to yourself.
Yeah, she would use it as more like long-term self-interest and like integrity as more of a way to think about it. But yeah, no, I think that's true. And when I read that part in the Screwtape Letters, I couldn't help think of something that really bothers me all the time is when people win awards and stand up and say, I'm humbled to receive this. I can't stand that phrase because it's an outright fucking lie 100% of the time, and I hate it.
I would love to see someone say, yeah, well, you know what? I worked my butt off and I did a lot of really hard things.
You feel honored to receive it. you're not humbled to receive it.
No,
It's like,
I think you and I disagreed about this once before. I think some of the time the word that they really are looking for is honored and proud. But I think sometimes humbled is the right word when it's a feeling of, I don't know if I can live up to what you think I am.
I
Like-
interpret that as
Yeah.
saying, when you say you're humbled, you mean you don't deserve it. You're not proud of the accomplishment. That's
Right.
how I hear
Yeah.
it when people say that. You should
I
say
don't ever
you're
hear
honored.
it the way Carrie just said. Yeah.
You know that sticker that says, I want to be the person my dog thinks I am? That's what humbled. I'm not that person, but my dog thinks I'm awesome.
All
I don't-
roads lead back to Tiger.
Yeah.
But what about looking at it in context today? Going back to what Carrie was saying, right? Today, and what Carter is saying, and Thomas, people today, or a lot of us, tend to virtual signal a lot with stuff we say. Like, oh yeah, I'm this, or oh, I feel I'm gonna do this, or oh yeah, I care about that. I care about social justice, or a lot of it's sort of hypocritical, right? So it's almost like you're trying to keep appearances instead of just being genuine, like this is how I feel, and acting like that, but not trying to make it look like you are a certain way. And that's what a lot of us, I mean, without knowing sometimes, but many people do. And you see it even in social justice today when we're talking about Black Lives Matter, for example. The thought is great, but sometimes you see how corporate America has been, or something has to be social justice. Everybody's like, oh yeah, but our company is going to train everybody with these special courses on social. You understand what I'm saying? So it happens a lot in this day and age.
Sorry. So I wanted to bring up, so I agree like with a lot of what's been said. I think that one of the root issues that I see that ties kind of a lot of this together is that it's not like art for art's sake anymore. It's art for propaganda's sake. Like literally there's now like diversity quotas for like winning. I don't even know. I don't pay attention to award shows, but apparently there's like diversity quotas or whatever for like winning an award. And I think that there's like a danger in, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with like socialism, like Christian socialism, like sorry, I've got 2 points in my head and I'm bouncing between them. Okay, so first with the art for art's sake, like I think that if you have, okay, now I know what I mean with social justice. So social justice, it's like when it becomes something like it's not just Christianity anymore, it's Christianity plus this means to an end. It's like it's no longer worshiping God for God's sake or making art for art's sake. It's to get an agenda done, prove something, bring about a cause. And then I think the whole root of that is that once that becomes a thing, it immediately poisons the waters. Like it immediately becomes this dangerous thing. And it doesn't, people can still have the best of intentions, but it starts to become this dangerous thing because you're no longer creating a work of art to show off your talent or to do the best you can. You're now need to make a social statement about it. You're no longer acting and fighting for people, like for what should be Black Lives Matter. You're no longer fighting for that cause. You're fighting to show that that cause, that you are one of the right people. And it's like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Like it's always like, yeah. So I'm trying to track with that, but yeah. So that's kind of where I'm getting at, where it's just like, yeah. Okay. So I'm seeing Thomas, the process
I hear what you're saying.
itself. Exactly. Yeah. So that's where I'm getting at.
Yeah. It's almost like it cannibalizes whatever the original goal was. Like a good example of what you're talking about, Allison, I think is in Saturday Night Live has the past couple years lately, I think, been putting something above comedy in terms of priorities. And so then they're still trying to do comedy, but there's something that's a little more, there's a sacred cow there that they won't make fun of, or there's something that they want to, some type of moral instruction they want to give you that has become a little bit more important than the comedy at times. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Yeah. When you're like adding, there was a part in the book about that where he's like Christianity plus whatever, and then that whatever becomes the focus.
I think that was the pacifism or patriotism thing, right? It doesn't matter as long as we can wrap one of those things up with Christianity, that can become the focus.
Well, he included spelling reform, Christianity and spelling reform. You can do Christianity and new math, Christianity and keto diet.
And I think the reason it falls apart is because it appeals to people's egos. So then they're suddenly like, they're doing things to prove that they're a good person, or they're doing things to prove that they're on the right side of things. And then that can take over an entire movement. Like, it's like the group's ego is like, we have to prove that we're the good thing or whatever. So yeah, that's.
I think the point of Christianity is to place the common good outside the ego, basically.
Yeah, I think on a lot of these, the point is to like direct people away from the truth by putting up two alternatives. And the point is to corrupt the person, right? Like, it doesn't matter what ideology you're pursuing if it's corrupting you internally. And I think that's what he's saying a lot of the time when he puts up like patriotism or pacifism. And then there's another line in, where was it? Oh, chapter 12. He's talking about this one man who ended up in hell, who spent his life doing neither what he liked nor what he ought to have done. So they're pursuing like these ends that are socially acceptable, or that they think they need to do to look good, but it's not like moral or even what they want to do.
Yeah, following that on chapter 13, he goes deep into reality versus perceived reality. And you let him go for a walk out by that mill, and he enjoyed it for the sake of enjoyment, just because he liked it. You read that book just because he wanted to, not because his friends were like going to applaud him for reading that book, White Fragility. Like you got so many things right there. That's my favorite chapter. Chapter 13. You got hobbies for joy, knitting and sewing, whatever. Things you love just because you love them. They want to take away joy, take away anything that makes you happy. Just remove it and leave you a shell of a person,
You need to be doing the work. That's what you all need to be doing. Not going out there and having fun, but doing the work.
This is one of those things that's a good, that you can see the analogy between Christianity or I guess maybe even other types of religions and social justice is the doing the work part. Because you can see Christians who become just obsessed with works or with virtue signaling and showing people what a good Christian they are, and maybe showing themselves what a good Christian they are. I've just learned this word legalistic. I didn't know much about it before, but Christians who are kind of like just, it's all about being as perfect as they can in the work. But you can see that same thing in social justice about, I've got all the right hashtags and all the right virtuous posts, and here I am doing the work, and I do the work so much I don't even have joy because that's a privilege.
Yep.
You're allowing yourself to be validated by others, basically. And I think part of what he's saying in the book is you have to be true to yourself. And I think Thomas was talking about that too, right? I think that's the message he's saying. You have to be true to yourself and not do stuff or do things or act a certain way because others are going to see it as good, or going to, it's going to be agreeable to what they believe or what they think you should be doing. And I think part of that is part of the book too. If you think about Christianity, I mean, I talked about the two little, like the devil and the little angel here, but supposedly I don't think God is in your ear telling you what you should do. I think from Christianity, what you get is that we all have free will and we can do whatever we want, right? And the one who's trying to corrupt us, to take us away from that, is let's say the devil here, who's telling us, and like Caitlin was saying, doesn't matter where you go, they're just trying to get you from what you should be focused on, and just being honest and true to yourself. And that's, I think, part of the message and some of the messages in the book.
I didn't write it down, but I know in at least 2 places he says, remember, we're here to fuddle him. We are just here to mix him up. We don't want him to, the fire one. He's like, we want them running into a fire, or wait, fire, what was it?
The fire extinguisher. I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah, that's the point that I was going to bring up too. He's talking about like what's popular in every age. So I think he says in like cruel ages make them think about courage, but in complacent ages make them think about like doing everything in moderation. So they're focusing on the virtue that's closest to the vice of that age, when really that's not what they need to be thinking about at that time, but they're just doing it because it's popular. Was that what you were meaning?
Got it.
I love that part too, because it made me think of, he said, I'm looking for it because I underlined it too, but it was about, in any age, we're going to make them think that the biggest vice is the thing that they're actually, they're not in danger of falling into. And it made me think of the narrative we're being sold about like what an awful, backwards, sexist, racist patriarchy we live in. And it's like, could you say that that's got some truth today, that we're focused on all these things that are not really the problem, but it's sort of creating that, we're creating that problem. And by doing that, it keeps you from looking at like, hey, what are the real issues? What are the real cultural problems that we're plagued with today that are hurting people and hurting marginalized people and that what are the things that unite us, the problems that unite us that we could be tackling instead of this thing that we weren't in danger of falling into currently.
I think that's a big difference between some of these discussions we get in with social justice types or identitarians. Is it's not that we don't think there is a problem, we just don't think that is the problem. So that's not at the top of our list of things to figure out, and to them that is it.
How about in letter 25? I don't know exactly where. Caitlin has my book, or her book, not my book. So I just have a bunch of notes. It's basically, it's like you're drunk with emotion. And if you want to make, in any era, you want to make slaves or tyrants out of them, we're just going to make liberalism the prime bogey. Like that kind of hit it, because I don't know, you go from one extreme to the other extreme. You want to be, it says, what direction do we want to go? Is this progressive or is this reactionary, right?
Did anybody else find themselves in when he talked about tempting the patient not with sweet vices, but with things he doesn't even enjoy, staring into a cold grate, reading a column of advertisements in yesterday's paper? And I read that right after I've fallen down YouTube holes where I just, it's like, yeah.
He made the point that either way works. Like either of those ways work for what he's trying to do.
Yeah, but it's more satisfying to get the man's soul by having him just sit and stare into the dead grate instead of at least having fun with these vices. I mean, if you're going out for debauchery, you're at least having a good time. Whereas if you're sitting there bored reading yesterday's newspaper when you're not even interested, they're getting your soul and giving you nothing, not even a little bit of transient fun in return. And it's like, why doesn't that just sound like me?
Yeah, that's the stealers of joy. What were you talking about the other day, Carrie? Like they were stealing the happiness. I forgot what you called them.
Joy eaters. Yeah.
There you go. That's it.
Well, that part, Christina, made me think of Carter actually in his recent admonition about social media and the time and having it on your phone and everything. Because I've definitely wasted. I have a little tracker now that tells me how many hours a day I spend online, and at the end of it, am I more fulfilled? Am I closer to reality? Am I living in the present? I like that. I liked his stuff about the present, being the closest we have to what eternity feels like. It made me think of the kind of hippy dippy stuff I read a few years ago when I was reading Eckhart Tolle, and he talked about living in the present instead of the future or the past. I really found that very helpful. I liked Eckhart Tolle.
Is that tracker just for social media or for all internet at all?
All of your phone. It tells you how many hours you spend on the phone per day, per week, and it breaks down what apps you were on. And it's shameful.
I need something that does that.
Sorry.
I was just gonna say one thing that a through line that's occurring to me here is that a lot of the methods for undermining these people involve getting them to behave in automatic ways and not living the patient, getting the patient to behave in automatic ways and not living consciously, which I know is when I first even encountered the concept of living consciously, it was like 20 years ago, and obviously no one lives consciously all the time, and we all are on autopilot a lot more than we should be. But that concept itself was very valuable. And I think that a lot of, I don't know if anyone else sees that, but a lot of these methods I'm seeing is like prevent the introspection and the self-awareness of like that comes with living consciously and consciously choosing what you're doing, and get them to get the patient to do something without knowing why he's doing it.
Yeah.
Do you see both Screwtape and the enemy doing the same thing? Like they both use the same method, right?
No,
Well, we
I
don't
don't
really
think
see
so.
what the enemy does, do we? Other than the cloud of asphyxiating clouds, we don't really get to know anything about the enemy.
We have to figure it out from what Screwtape says about it, and you don't know if it's true or not because the devil lies. But I have a question. Like I didn't can think of this reading it, but it seems to me that if you actually believe it's possible, like if you believe maybe there is a God, or you believe there is a God and there might be a devil, it comes off different. That's just a question for the people that read that, believing that there actually could be a God and a devil. I think you might interpret it different. Think about
what
it.
I said to Carter and Beverly, and I forget who else was there before this started, is that I believed in Satan before I believed in God, because there seemed to be an intelligence behind evil in the world. And that might be part of why I loved Screwtape when I started reading it, because it was telling me, yeah, there is an intelligence behind the evil in the world. You're not imagining this.
I don't understand how you can have one and not the other. Like it's the same belief. You believe that there's intelligence behind evil is the same as believing there's intelligence behind good. It's the same faith. Both require faith.
It's kind of like Jordan Peterson talks about how some people come to believe in God or in the existence of good because it's easier to see the existence of evil, and once they've acknowledged that evil seems to exist, then like you're saying, Keith, and you're saying, Christina, then they necessarily are like, oh, I can see the good now. It almost, isn't that kind of what happens in the last chapter? Is he sees God, the patient sees God, because he saw the demon, and then did I read that wrong?
Oh, you saw it right.
That's how I read it.
Yeah.
Well, there's an earlier passage that says something about the enemy gets most of the patients through the troughs and not through the peaks. So it's not necessarily when people are immersed in joy, but it's when they're at the bottom that they usually go to the enemy. So I think that's probably correlated there, and probably where we see a lot of and he also says something about pain and pleasure, to where that is the touchstone for reality. And that reminds me of some of some of those postmodern people again utilize that. And I think we talked about it a bit with Kimberly Crenshaw, where the only way that she was even able to push back against postmodernism was identifying that the pain of oppression is in itself the manner in which they can is really the only reality they have. So even someone who's coming from a postmodern view and is deep within critical race theory has to come back to the reality that pain itself exists. So I remember reading that in here and thinking that there is still some part of reality that these people in that postmodern critical theory world still have to acknowledge. So if the pain is there, then the pleasure must also be, but they never acknowledge that. It's always about the pain and the oppression. And kind of like you were saying with the joy eaters, I never hear anyone in that world talk about anything outside of what hurts.
Yeah. The other thing that they did, the other thing that this book did was that, which I don't see in all Christian writing, but it was here. There was this idea that it wasn't just an afterlife that was ultimately pleasurable and better if you followed, I'm gonna say the enemy, but God, it's hard because everything's inverted. But if you went with the enemy, it wasn't that ultimately actually even your own long-term happiness was being undermined by your short-term pleasure. That ultimately the enemy had the pleasure was ultimately the enemy's domain, not the domain of Screwtape and Wormwood. And so even though they could use short-term pleasure to undermine you, actually you're losing pleasure in the long run anyway. This is that the domain of pleasure is in and of itself part of the enemy's domain, and the small pleasures that you might think that you're getting in the moment aren't as pleasurable as the pleasure you would get if you, I would say, had a more rational long-term approach to pleasure, but in book it would be more like if you followed God's advice and didn't engage in those short-term pleasures.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like the way you can describe that, and you would say rational long-term approach to pleasure, or as a Christian, like following God, what God's commands are. It makes me think of a sermon my preacher gave recently about how all of God's no's, one way you can look at all of the boundaries that God puts on you for how he wants you to behave in the world, that all of those no's are meant to point you to very wonderful yeses. And, you know, that long-term rational, I guess, the way you put it, you know, if you say no to overeating sweets now, there will be benefits later, you know, like whatever the thing is. Yeah. Did you guys like the weird part about the patient's mother and the way she insists on getting her tea and her toast in really specific controlling ways? I was like, this sounds like it's modeled on someone he really knows. Is this what his mother's like?
We're talking about overindulgence, right?
Yeah, where she was underindulging to show how non-gluttonous she was when she was just as fussy as somebody
self-indulgence. That's the right word. Self-indulgence.
Yeah. Yes.
Instead of gluttony, which we traditionally understand gluttony being, you know, somebody who overeats or something like that. Here, he was saying that in her case, she's eating a very little amount, and she always very, very specific about how much she wants and what she doesn't want. And that act was in his writing was, you know, still, you know, she was doing the wrong thing because she was doing what he would define as gluttony, where you were self-indulging all the time.
And she's just a royal pain to everybody around her. You know, like nobody can please this woman. So why do you want her at your house? Like,
the Bay Area is full of people who eat like that. It's usually like organic and vegan and like locally sourced, blah, blah, blah. Tomorrow is pointing this out in chat, so I'll give her credit for making me think of this. But there's the Portlandia episode where they ask about the chicken and they want to go see the chicken on the farm to see how it's raised and if it's happy. That's kind of the world we live in. There's a lot of people who aren't gluttonously overeating, but they're certainly doing that.
Is that when they go and live on the farm then too? Is that same?
Yeah,
sketch?
It turns out to be a cult and they live there for a while.
I was just thinking about that sketch for some reason.
So they say, okay, this chicken looks really happy. That's the one you should cut the head off of?
I guess. I don't know. I'm not sure what they wanted to make sure he's raised and had friends and whatever. I don't know.
They're at the restaurant at the end of the universe eating the animal that wants to be eaten.
That's a good next fiction book.
Ooh.
I liked there was one other part I was thinking of as oh yeah, okay, so well, as a Christian I think I understand what he was trying to warn about, but I think even if you're not, perhaps you could get something from this part. And it was where he was talking about how he had started dating this disgusting Christian woman who seemed to have very little entryway for them to, try and corrupt with her, except for her view of herself as somehow being part of a selective set of Christians or of people who are more intelligent, and sort of setting yourself apart and maybe putting yourself on a pedestal. And I'm in this selective group and I deserve to be here. It's something of my doing, and using that to corrupt from within. And I can certainly see that being
the book
a
was
temptation.
written. It was written during a time when, particularly for Christian or Catholic, like divorce was huge no. So people did get into marriages that were just as miserable. And I think that's, think about it at the time he wrote it, when he talks about either, having sex every night with a different person or falling in love with a woman and living for the rest of your life. Like both of those could turn out miserable. The devil was sometimes right in this book.
I think the most interesting thing for the Christian woman and being part of a group, or even the mother who is being very particular about how she eats, like those are things, as I'm reading this, I'm laughing at it. I'm like, these people are ridiculous. But I think how C.S. Lewis is so brilliant is like, he doesn't name them, and he makes you laugh at them, and then you think, wait, that's me too. And or like my friend, like, and you can put yourself into that situation. And I think that's one of the things I thought was really powerful about this, just how relatable. And like the fact that they're not named, they're just like everyday people.
So you interpreted yourself as the patient too, in parts, like Carrie said?
Yeah.
That never occurred to me once.
So
That's
I think
interesting.
The patient is like everybody, society.
I was just waiting the whole time. Like I thought the whole thing is a false dichotomy. I was waiting for the third possibility. The character was the third possibility, which is that both the enemy and Screwtape were wrong. Like they're both wrong. That's a possibility that Lewis never raises. And I was waiting for a character to be that. That's the one I wanted to be.
See, I think maybe I'm wrong, but I think what he's writing is kind of, and I really appreciate us doing it in book club and people who are not Christians wanting to read this with us too, because I almost feel like this is one of those kind of books where you're writing to Christians and you're trying to point out their own, like everyone is the patient. Everyone's the patient. It's human nature. And just because you're a Christian, like, don't be blind to all the things you could fall into. And maybe sometimes, just like he says, in society, we tend to focus on the things the vices we're least likely to fall into, and we're ignoring the ones we are. I think as humans, sometimes we do that too. And like, for example, I pray about ego a lot. And one of my friends, when I told her this, was like, "Oh, you're one of the least egotistical people I know. Why is that?" And I'm like, because I'm not. And the second that I think I am is when that's going to take me down. And for me, that is something to be cognizant of as we grow a following. And, everybody wants people to listen to their ideas and opinions if they think they're right and they think they have something important to say. But there's this temptation of that I've seen happen to people many times. Maybe I think in a way I was blessed to get to work in the entertainment industry. As many things that I didn't like about it, I got to see people fall victim to ego, and then ego becomes bigger than whatever their goal is. Just like we're talking about in Christianity, if social justice moves in, it becomes bigger than Christianity. And, so I guess I'm kind of rambling here, but I viewed it as a warning that he was kind of writing to Christians of watch out for the things that you think you don't need to watch out for. And the things you're probably focusing on to the exclusion of these other things that could creep up on you and get you like a cat.
I saw that too, but it took me almost to the end to get that. And that's why I kind of asked the question, like, do you have to be Christian to really understand it the way that several people here are doing it? And that didn't work for me because I was looking for this third possibility. I did get it. Yeah. So I understand it as a warning to Christians. I did interpret it that, but not in the beginning. And it's not a
Right.
warning to me because I cannot be the patient.
Well, I wonder then if you can write this book without having the enemy be God and Screwtape Wormwood being demons, and have the characters named differently, so we don't have this religious aspect of it, and it's just saying, hey, because gluttony is gluttony. You know, you don't have to be Christian to suffer from gluttony. So if you frame it in a very different way, all these things that you should or shouldn't do are probably good to know, regardless of whether or not you are or are not religious.
And part of what I asked about the question, you know, is it it's a choice between following God or following the devil. If you're Christian, then you just, when you hear that, you're automatically in good versus evil. Like that's what you believe. But I don't believe that. Like I don't follow that. So good to me can be arrived without either one of those. So that's where that question comes from. I like what you said, Tom.
I think is good about Christianity is that it gets you to aspire to something that's permanently outside the ego.
Yeah. I mean,
So-
I do think I think one of my issues just with, and maybe this was why I thought it was boring, was that I get that there was advice that there was trying to be given to me there, but because I'm not Christian, I imagined because I was Christian for much of my life, I imagined as a Christian reading this book, I could relate to the patient and try and be vigilant about different voices and thoughts in my head and cast them in terms of wormwood and quote the enemy, and like think about them in that terms, and it would be helpful from a psychological defense perspective, and I could think about that. But as a non-Christian, I can't think about, like, I don't think that's going on, and I can't think in those terms. Like I can't imagine wormwood getting me to do stuff. So it ultimately, the advice was it's hard to digest because it's not how I think. That's not how I would solve those. Like I recognize the problems. I recognize the issues that he's putting forward, but that's not the solution. The solution that I would have to them isn't like, oh, that's wormwood whispering in your ear, you have to do this other thing. It's like, that's not how I get to where I'm going. But I do understand if you're a Christian that totally that could be helpful.
Well, then
But
just
what if? Go
substitute
ahead.
Beverly D'Angelo for Screwtape.
Yes, that's what I was gonna say. If you take
because that's not where our morality comes from for me. I don't follow.
No,
a
but it's
leader
somebody
with
else trying to
morality.
tell you to do something. It's other people trying.
It's somebody
you know,
trying to
It's a
lure you
tempter.
away from truth and lure you away from goodness and decency. Which,
But I
It's
guess
like-
I already have a very strong sense of that's my job all the time. Like I do that.
It-
I'm not.
it's like
I don't succeed all the time, but like that's what the program running in my head constantly is. What is true? How do I know what it's my responsibility? Constantly. I don't always do it. I fail, as Carrie can attest to. I've often failed, but like that program's already running into my head. So introducing a character called Wormwood who's got some, one-liners doesn't really help me.
what if we switched it for like a Star Wars
Please.
type theme, where you got the light and the dark?
No, because I don't.
Jedi's and Siths.
No, because it's for me. I try and approach things very rationally. Like I have reasons for why I'm doing things. So I like.
Then you
I
can't
don't
read
need
fiction.
inspiration.
You can't get into any kind of fiction at that point.
No, I
because
love a
if
lot of fiction, absolutely. But I don't take psychological advice from. Like it's hard for me to translate. Like I can take psychological advice from fiction if I see someone doing something and watch their actions and see their actions fail and how like I can relate to characters and see the mistakes they made and get that. But I didn't relate to any of the characters in this because I can't imagine having people in my ear and my head, and like so I just didn't relate to the patient at all. So it was very difficult for me to be like, I don't know, like
That's interesting because I didn't really, I mean, it did conjure the imagery like Manny talked about, the devil and the angel on your shoulders, but it didn't, I don't really need to view it as a devil talking in one ear and God in the other.
Just like,
I don't.
No.
Your
You got
conscience.
CNN over here
Yeah.
and mainstream
Yeah.
media.
Some of the
Well,
imagery I
the
got
devil's
was,
a tempter, right? And the devil's Facebook is always trying to tempt you away from your present life, and it's literally an intelligence.
Yes.
It's true.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
On page 1, right back to page 1, there's a part where it says, your man has been accustomed to have a dozen incompatible philosophies dancing about together in his head. So I think throughout the rest of the book, it's like tracking all these different philosophies and all these different things that are coming at him. So it's not necessarily like yes, it says it comes from the devil, but like there's also these tangible things that you can see, like the philosophies or the CNN, the social media, like in our day.
Yeah, look, I would just prefer some if these got lessons about human nature, I would prefer that they're written down rationally from a philosophic perspective, explaining like, here's why they are. This is how the cookie crumbles. This is how things fall apart. This is why short-term gain and sacrificing long-term benefit is bad. Like that makes sense. Like all that makes sense to me. Like a lot of the lessons, it's just a presentation. It's just like,
then you want Mere Christianity. You want to read that book, and that one is less preachy than this book. There's no, like, he doesn't even talk about barely at all, which is weird because it's called Mere Christianity, God and devil. Like, it's just moral. What's moral, what's not? Where does it come from? How do you do it? You know?
Yeah, I guess I already have a way where I know what's moral. And like, I already know how I derive morality. So I don't need someone to just list off random morality rules for me.
And I would rather read another Ayn Rand book if we want to use fiction to get more.
You don't need reminders though of things about yourself. It didn't offer any new kind of insights on like the part about taking pride in humility.
There was definitely some reminders of like, oh yeah, that I do that sometimes, or like, oh yeah, that's a thing. Like certainly there was stuff that I recognized that was like, oh yeah, people do that, or I've done that, or I know people who do that. Like certainly, but it wasn't. It was disconnected from my. It was disconnected from the hierarchy of my philosophical and moral values, because it was just a random like, oh, sometimes people do this thing, and I'm going to talk about it in this context. And I was like, oh yeah, but actually for me, it's in this different context. There's a different path that I used to get there. So that's why it wasn't. That's why I had trouble with it. But I get, like, if you're a Christian, again, I totally get it. And can I just say something about prayer that I want to throw out to the Christians, because I really like this part, even though I don't pray, but I want to know what you guys thought. Something that I thought was interesting was, it seemed to me that Screwtape was very happy with the idea of when you wanted to pray for someone, praying for abstract things rather than very like concrete. Oh, I need to pray for my enemies. I'm going to pray that they're, fulfilled and their soul is good, or they're happy. I'm not going to pray that they like get over their cancer. I'm not going to pray like about something specific in reality. I'm going to pray and the idea that like you're praying for someone who's even more abstract from the actual person. So the less concrete you can be, the less effective it is. And I do think there's a metaphor there for dealing with people generally. I think a lot of people will view other people in a very abstract sense rather than help them with actually very concrete things, right?
That's all of social justice. Think? It's them thinking of people in the abstract, because they're not actually helping a person. They're talking about the manner in which, and generally it's the manner in which other people should be helping abstract ideas of people. So I think that's spot on.
Yeah, it's more like, imagine the social justice warrior praying for Donald Trump. They're going to be, oh Lord, make him stop lying so much, instead of,
I pray he finds Jesus or finds social justice. Yeah.
No, but they focus on his faults, and it's, Lord, cure him of this fault, so that the time they're spending praying is time they're spending fault finding.
Yes. Yes. And I had a friend write me recently who said, who's on the right. And she said, I realized I've been praying wrong. And she had this epiphany. She said, I've been praying that AOC stops being such a stupid, I'm putting paraphrasing.
Did she really pray that?
But it was like something negative, right? And she was like, and then I realized I should be praying for her for positive things, like not framing it from this negative, but praying for awakening and enlightenment, all this. Now that is still vague kind of prayers that he's calling out. But I like that change from the negative to the positive. It's like, are you making judgments in your prayers? Like, are you judging people in your prayers? And one thing, Carter, I'm glad you asked this question, because I both like that he was saying this, that you should get more specific, and I'm going to try that. But on the other hand, I've been practicing trying to be more broad and open-ended in my prayers because I thought for a while my prayers tended to be too specific and controlling. Like I would pray for something that I wanted. Now, like I want to get over this illness, or I want to whatever. I want
Maybe
this
it's
thing to
specificity
happen.
for other people and broad for yourself.
Right. Or for them. Yeah. And then I started thinking about prayer. That's the way I prayed as a little kid. And then now that I've become kind of new to this, I started thinking of prayer in a different way of like, most of my prayers are about God's will being done. And they are very open-ended and vague and helping me to come to grips with whatever God's will is, because otherwise I feel like I'm trying to control it too much. I'm trying to play God and be like, give me this thing that I think is going to be great for me. And maybe it won't be great for me. My track record hasn't been great of picking out what I think is good. So I don't know.
Unanswered prayers.
Oh yeah, that's a great song. Who said that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's the idea of like not being centering on self, but then like in prayer, you're supposed to center on God, right? Like not yourself. And then he also talks about in the book, like self-serving religion. I'm not sure where it is, but being religious to like achieve an end or achieve what you want. And I don't know where I'm going with this anymore, but.
Well, I think so. Something that I think like, and you could, so as someone who used to be a Christian, is not a Christian anymore, like I flip it around in my head a lot. Like I kept flipping, like, as I was reading this book, like applying it to different ways, like whether it be like real world examples of right now, or Christianity or whatever. But I think with prayer, like praying for your enemies, or, complaining about a politician you don't like on social media or something like that, like anything where it's like a thought and you're criticizing your perceived enemy, it's more often than not projection. Like I think that like that's my biggest complaint with the far left, is that to me it feels like projection for everything. They're projecting, look at Donald Trump, he's such a racist, he's such a whatever, he's so all these bad things. And then it's like, well, that's ironic. Like I'm thinking here, like that's ironic because I think that a lot of the far left ideologies are now the opposite of what they claim to be against. So like they are racist. They are like anti-racism ends up becoming racist because you're obsessed with people's skin color and how it relates to their identity, and you're obsessing over things like that. So I just think that like bringing it back to praying for your enemies, and like if you're praying for like negative things, you're probably, that's in yourself and you can't see it in yourself because it's just too painful, or you're just that unself-aware. And so you're like I've catch myself thinking this, like getting so mad about like, oh, these far leftists are so radical. They're so, and then I'm like, okay, but I'm being blinded by my own anger now. And then like, I'm at risk of becoming something like I don't want to be either. So I just think that, and like I'm rambling now, but I think that that's something that is useful, and that is why I have a great respect for Christianity and any religion that can do this, that it turns the self back to kind of an outside framework, so that you don't become like you really do need like your own, like a different, like a monitor that's outside of you, that's like tracking. So I think that I just think that yeah, I think that's like just something like a barometer to have.
One of the things I loved is when Screwtape says you want your patient to get to the point where he can practice self-reflection for an hour without noticing any of the things that somebody who's lived with him or worked in the same office sees after 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's a great one. I do like that one as well.
That makes me think of, or to the point where they can forget things they've learned. That's happened to me. When I go back and read old journaling's great, because you can go back and read it and be like, oh gosh, I had that realization about myself 5 years ago, and then I forgot it and I did nothing about it.
Totally agree with that.
And now I'm just recognizing it again. Yes, I knew 5 years ago this was a problem. I didn't fix it.
Well, you guys were talking about this on Covfefe Break the other day too, and I think I mentioned it in chat, where it was just, I think sometimes humans probably just are good at compartmentalizing bad things. And so then you forget, and I've done this a lot with like, and it'll happen over and over. I'm like, I forgot this happened a couple of years ago or a couple of months ago. And so I started writing things down, like, remember how this felt, remember what happened here and what you thought of it. And then look back at it too, because you're going to forget it again.
I think that's why women have more than one baby sometimes, because they forget how painful it was.
Hey, your kid is on the show right now.
Yeah, she's a big pain all the time. But I kind of wanted to talk before, I don't know how long we're going to go, but there was something, cowardice in one of the last letters. And right now we're hitting on this, talking about other people and seeing what's within you and seeing other people, how they see you. And part of it said about hatred in general, forgive your own enemy, but not anyone else's. So basically, as a social justice person, it's okay for me to not like what that guy over there is doing on behalf of somebody else, you know? But I don't have to forgive them because they're hurting somebody else, right? And then it goes into, in the same letter, promoting cowardice as like, instead of being, courageous, now we got everybody walking around with masks, and it's okay to be afraid, and it's okay to be this. And that's like the virtue of the day, is to be afraid and to be a coward, instead of, a young person enlisting and being a pilot and going off to war, knowing that he might die because he's courageous and he knows that it's for the good. Now we have people hiding in their homes.
It was really funny that it says that cowardice is the only vice that we can't make people proud of. Well, the author obviously hasn't seen 2020.
Yeah, I noticed
Good
that doesn't seem to be true anymore. People are proud of what weenies they are.
They are. It's so scary.
That's a great point, Stephen. How funny.
And it reminds me, I think he mentioned something about courage in itself isn't a virtue, but it's what happens when whether or not you display that virtue is where you act courageous. So if your virtue is, I don't know, some name of virtue, whether or not you have the courage to display that virtue. So he started to bring courage and virtue together in a way that I hadn't ever thought about.
I'll name selfishness as the virtue.
Whoa, but we can kind of look at that in the silent majority thing, where people are going along with things that they know are wrong because they're scared. So they're like, I stalwartly see the truth, but I'm not going to say it.
Mm-hmm.
I think even to Keith's point, it's selfishness. So if I'm going to be selfish in the Rand concept where I'm going to stay true to myself, that's the virtue. Whether or not I'm courageous enough to hold to that virtue, that's what's important. And so courage in itself is not the virtue, but it's what helps you to stick to what you decide those virtues are.
Right. It's a necessary characteristic for actually being virtuous.
It's an ingredient for virtuous.
There's another point where he talks about, I think it's letter 10. He says all mortals turn into the things that they're pretending to be. So he's talking about like he's going along with his friends, and eventually, like if he can get in that mindset for long enough, he's just going to believe that because it's easier. That's what he's doing. His friends are doing. And there's no courage there. Like you just start going along with whatever they're telling you to do.
That reminds me of that monster quote that Carrie always says. The when you fight a monster, don't be that monster, whatever it is.
The Nietzsche quote.
Yeah, Nietzsche quote. Yeah, it also makes me think of Jordan Peterson talking about just practically about habits and, when maybe you could say vices or pleasures, when you start to overindulge or things become habits and then they become compulsions and you become what you practice, I think is what he said. So sometimes we like to forget when we're under the spell of some kind of compulsion that, like if you don't want to be an alcoholic, well, you can't very well drink to excess every night. You at some point you got to stop the habit, if that's because you're going to become what you're practicing. And if you want to be healthy, you need to start practicing healthy habits. Maybe go to the gym a few times a week and just make until it becomes who you are, and it's not just something you're trying to do. I thought that it made me think of that anyway. You become
Fake it
what
till you make
do.
it.
Yeah, fake it till you make it. You
Exactly.
become what you do.
We used to see that in the
I found a
military.
quote. Oh, I'm sorry, Thomas. I found a quote that I think Caitlin might have been alluding to. So, this was like one of the things that popped out to me more than like I think anything in this book, because I think I struggle with this myself. And it's 50 in my book. It's letter 10, and it's he's talking about the Christian, the patient is meeting some new friends, and no doubt he must very soon realize that his own faith is in direct opposition to the assumptions on which all the conversations of his new friends is based. I don't think that matters much, provided that you can persuade him to postpone any open acknowledgement of the fact. And this, with the aid of shame, pride, modesty, and vanity, will be easy to do. And then he will be silent when he ought to speak, and laugh when he ought to be silent. And I just think that is like, to me, that is a quote for our times. Like it's like we might, we might be around people and start to realize, okay, I am the minority in this situation. Like I definitely have the minority opinion, and I don't feel like it is safe for me to share my opinion, lest I be labeled a racist or a bigot or something. And so, as long as we're stuck in our own, maybe we're feeling shame because maybe we are wrong. Maybe we do have it wrong. Maybe all these other people are right. Or we I don't know. I highlighted shame, pride, modesty, and vanity because I think they seem contradictory, but I think they all can be used to kind of create self-doubt and therefore like self-censorship. So like with shame, it's like, okay, well, maybe I am wrong. Like maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm the one, like if I'm the only one who's thinking this way, maybe I'm just wrong. Pride, it's like, no, I think I'm right. And I'm going to feel kind of haughty about that. Like I'm the only one in this room who's right. But that still is not going to like get you to say anything. And then like modesty, it's like false modesty. I'm not going to share because I don't want to offend you. Then vanity, like I don't know, like I feel superior to being, what did I write? I feel superior for being both right and respectful / quiet. So basically, like no matter what, you could get stuck in this era, this cycle within yourself of just always silencing yourself because it's just not, you just can't, like there's not that space. And I think that is something like globally, like that's happening. It's like there's this pressure to be quiet, and as long as there's enough people kind of, and I love this part, it's just like persuade him to postpone any acknowledgement of that. Like just deny it to yourself that it's even happening. Like, oh no, it's fine that I did, like I'm kind of disagreeing with them, but it's fine. It's not really happening. Like it's all, and I think that's how you create like a generation of people that are just, they don't even know how
confused.
And they don't know how to articulate what they mean. Yeah.
They're being fuddled.
Yeah. And it's like agreeableness is the characteristic or the personality characteristic that everybody seems to want to raise up. And I get that in the workplace a lot, to where I'm constantly surrounded by people who are like, oh, wow, yeah, that's a great idea. Oh, wow, yeah, that's a great idea. And you need to be disagreeable at the right points, whether it's on something small like, no, if you put that process into play, this is what's going to happen. And it can be tough. And if you take it into a work situation, I think it's easy to understand where things go wrong, because I work in a process-oriented place. And if I don't say, actually, that's going to go bad if you do this, and this is why, then I am now on the hook for not saying anything. And if you put it in a work context, it's like, oh, you know what, no problem. But that same concept applies to ethical and moral decisions. And we need to speak up. And it's tougher to do so because you're not just telling somebody their process at work isn't going to work. You're telling them that their life choices are bad. So it can be really tough, but I think it's the very same thing. And there's a lot of benefit to being disagreeable, and people need it.
It's tough love, right? Like you're the friend that's going to be like, hey man, that's not cool. What you're doing is wrong for you. And I can see that because I'm over here and you're in the middle of it. People don't do that anymore. They're just like, yep, they're the yes men, like you were saying. They're just, I'll go along with it because it's easy, you know?
Yeah, and if you aren't able to do what you want and be successful, it's not you. There's systemic and societal issues because you should be able to be who you want regardless of anything else, and that should be put on a pedestal.
It goes back to, and going back to what Thomas says, it's being honest, right? And it's so hard to do at this day and age because you always feel guilty. Oh, I don't want to tell him that I don't agree with what he's saying, or he's wrong, or I think this other way. So we basically tell the other person what we think they want to hear, but at the same time, we're being dishonest, right? And that's, I think, part of the message, part of the messages that you see in the book. He's trying to say you have to be true to yourself and believe in yourself and not just say or do things because you're doing it because other people want you to do it, or you think that's what they want to hear, or you know, I'm going to look good. You're just doing it to look good yourself, right? It's always with some ulterior motive that is not honest. That when he was talking about pleasures, and Carrie was talking about pleasures earlier, there was a passage where he was talking about the error that Wormwood made was that he allowed the patient to go on a walk through the valley or whatever, and just for the fact that the patient liked it, not for any other reason than just because he liked it. That was a good pleasure, right? Or that he, I don't forget what was the other one.
He read a book.
The reason, it was all because of how he felt. There was no other reason from outside, no conformity, nothing else that was driving the patient to do something, and that's what the pleasure really is, right? So,
Tamara in chat said something that I think I just want to repeat here.
Yeah, it's great.
She says, modern society equates love with endorsement and falsely equates tolerance with endorsement. I think she's spot on.
Yeah, I was just reading that, and I think that's exactly a really succinct way of saying what I was trying to say. So great job, Tamara.
It can be very tempting to tell people what they want to hear. So like in the work environment, somebody has a plan and a lot of people just nod their heads and say, yeah, great. And they go out to lunch and celebrate. And then the one guy in the corner that's, you know, he's the court jester. Sometimes he's the devil. And you say, no, that ain't going to work, man. That ain't going to work. And everybody jumps on you and they chase you out of the room. And then, in the engineering environment, like 6 months later, a guy comes back and says, man, you just saved us 6 months. Thanks. You know, even though he's pissed off at you for a month.
Right. Or 6 months later, you have Chernobyl. And I always think of the very end of that movie where he talks about, well, what happened? Well, everyone just kept lying and nodding their heads and going along. And now the whole thing exploded and we've got a nuclear disaster because of lies. And every lie owes a debt to the truth.
And it's harder in when you let a communist government run nuclear plants. That's not a good mix. You know, be like letting social justice warriors run a nuclear plant. Not a good idea.
Yeah, let's make
Carter I just want to mention Carter and Carrie, like you've made it clearer by bringing up the work example. Like they warn about don't identify your idea with yourself. Like, so if you have some idea, don't try to personify that. And when somebody points out, you know, your idea is wrong, man. Don't like say, oh, you're a jerk. You know,
that's
like,
a hard
the idea
thing
is
for
very
people
wrong
to do, though, Keith.
Yeah.
Like that's I coached. I think I've said this before, but it was a while ago. I spent a while coaching founders of companies, and like I would go through an exercise with them where I would like make them say out loud, "I am not my idea," because they like it gets really, really tough. Imagine you quit your job, you put all your life savings in, you're betting everything on this company, and you've got some idea, and someone comes along and says, "Oh, that's a crappy idea for these reasons." Like a lot of people get very, very pissed off and they take it personally when in fact that information is super valuable. And yeah, I mean, one thing that helped me speak up, obviously I am maybe to a fault the type of person who is disagreeable. But I definitely, one thing that helped me was two things that helped me. One was I realized I don't actually have to present an argument all the time. Sometimes my integrity is just saying I disagree, don't want to argue at, like I want it to be said that I disagree, the end. The other thing though is and maybe this isn't going to be, maybe Christians won't, I don't know, maybe this won't work for Christians, but I like to think that one of my responsibilities to myself and to the world is to reflect reality as best I can, right? So I'm just trying to say what I think is true. Sometimes I'm wrong, but like I'm just reflecting reality back to you. So if you want to shoot me, you're shooting the messenger. I'm not saying this is bad because it's my, I mean, sometimes I have opinions, but that's a separate issue. Like when you're stepping up with something, it's like, here's the reasons. I'm just giving you the reasons. I'm just giving you like, this is my analysis of reality. Like I could be wrong, but like, I'm just showing you what I think reality looks like right now. And it makes it a little bit easier to be disagreeable because you don't think of yourself as being a jerk as much. You're like, well, I'm just reflecting reality. Maybe I am still a jerk, but I think it's important to stand up and say stuff even if it's uncomfortable. And I've done the Big Five personality test. I know my agreeableness. It's not as low as everyone on the chat would think, but it's not high, right? It's not pegged at the high end of agreeableness because that's not helpful.
Yeah, I'm disagreeable, and I think that's why we're all here.
Well, one of the things
good point,
Carter, I mean, now this might be my specific take, but Jesus said he is the way, the truth, the light. And this is someplace where I fall out with a lot of pro-lifers. I'm there. I am sorry, but those gays for life, even if they're atheists, they're serving Jesus better than you are yelling at them because they are standing up for truth in the face of tremendous opposition where they might be alienated from their friends. They might lose their job. All kinds of horrible things happen to them because they're standing up for something that's true. Whereas you're in this church where you're just espousing a popular belief. So don't go saying that, oh, they're going to hell because they're gay. I'm sorry, they're standing up for what's true, which to me means they're standing up for Jesus.
Going back to agreeableness.
Go ahead, Manny.
What Thomas was talking about, thinking about it in today's context. I mean, if you think about how people react sometimes, and to give you an example, we've all heard stories where you have like all of these corporations bringing in these speakers with all this crazy ideology. Well, I call it crazy ideology, right? The anti-racist training and all that. And out of fear, a lot of people that do not believe that is right just don't say anything because they're afraid and they become agreeable, and that's not helping anybody, right? Or maybe they just don't say anything. Well, maybe they say, yeah, I agree with it, or they might not say anything. Either of them, both are wrong. They're not helping anything. So that's thinking about what you guys are doing, Carter and Carrie, with when you brought this group together. I mean, what you've done in terms of opening the voice to everybody and being brave and bringing the message like, hey, this is what we believe is right, and you're doing it not for any other reason that you think it's the right thing to do, right? And that's, I think, how everybody should be. If we had more people like that, we wouldn't have the problems we're probably running into right now with those social justice and everything we're seeing in the world.
Yeah.
Well, speaking about like effects on the world, right? Silent disagreement and silent agreement are the same.
Yeah.
Donald Trump was asked what he thought about somebody being horrible to him, and he said, "Oh, I don't care." so I learned from that.
So we've done almost 2 hours, although we had a little slow start with the tech problems, but maybe we go around and get any final comments from people. There was one thing that on my list, the only thing we haven't talked about yet that I wanted to talk about at some point was the humor part. Because I'm still thinking about it when he said there's 4 kinds of humor, 4 causes of human laughter, and he divides them into joy, which he says joy made me think of my high school reunion with good friends where everything's funny, everybody's laughing, you're just in the spirit of joy. He described it as like what humans are like when they're with family and friends at a holiday, and they're just giddy. It's not even what they're saying isn't even that funny, they're just joyful. and that kind of reason for laughter is something that is very akin to what, you know, heaven is like, or what, there's always music. It's this feeling that, anyway, the demon doesn't like it. So there's joy as a reason for laughter, and then there's fun, which he kind of described as, I think I love fun kind of humor, just
Is that
silly.
your frivolity? Is that your
That's
intermittent
frivolity. Fun is intermittent frivolity. Totally. It's puns, it's dad jokes, it's whatever. It's just silly fun. And the demon doesn't really like fun either. And then the joke proper, which is someone telling a joke. And that was kind of interesting because he delved into body sex raunchy jokes. And he said basically he was trying to say God doesn't really care about the people who laugh at raunchy jokes because who separate raunchy jokes from sexuality, who it doesn't make them think of sex, it makes them think of absurd stuff. They're laughing because it's funny. But then there are people who kind of get sexually titillated on the fact that you're telling a sexual joke. And he kind of separated those two things, which I thought was weird. He's like, the people who get titillated by sexual jokes, we can use that, right? But all this to get to the fourth kind. The demons seem to like what he described as the fourth kind of reason for laughter, which is flippancy. And flippancy made me think of some of my problems with sarcasm, Carter. He says, flippancy is the best of all. In the first place, it is very economical. Only a clever human can make a real joke about virtue, or indeed about anything else. Any of them can be trained to talk as if virtue were funny. So he's like, it takes a clever person to make an actual funny joke, but anybody can talk as if we all think this is ridiculous and hilarious, right, guys? And he goes, among flippant people, the joke is always assumed to have been made. No one actually makes it. But every serious subject is discussed in a manner which implies that they have already found a ridiculous side to it. And then I'm going to skip ahead to the last sentence. He says, it is 1,000 miles away from joy. It deadens instead of sharpening the intellect, and it excites no affection between those who practice it. And I just wondered if that made any of you guys think. I'm still trying to think about it, and if I think he's right that there's 4 kinds of humor, and if those are the 4. But there's definitely, I've recognized the thing that he's calling flippancy. I've definitely seen that. This sort of, people are just sort of mocking and like laughing as if the joke is implied. And if you don't agree with them, you are the butt of the joke, you know?
Yeah, I think he does conflate, though, flippancy. He always imagines that flippancy is about a virtue. But I mean, I think that's generally, I don't have a big problem with the categorization, but I don't know that it's always about a virtue. There is a lot of, I think, well, my psychology, but I think this is a healthy part of my psychology, so maybe I'm wrong. I don't think evil matters. I mean, it matters. Like, communism killed 100 million people last century, but ultimately evil is irrelevant and impotent and doesn't matter and will lose. So I ultimately think evil is just funny. Like, I prefer a flippant attitude towards evil, because I don't think we should treat evil as if we're scared of it. Evil is impotent. It's anti-reality, and yeah, it can do really horrible things. I'm not, obviously we treat it seriously, but there is something I think healthy just about like thinking about viewing evil as like ultimately in the scheme of things, evil is impotent.
Oh, hey, Scott Adams talks about the left-wing eye roll, but Ayn Rand actually talked about that as well. She wrote an essay called "The Argument by Intimidation," which you might want to take a look at.
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah.
The eye roll. That's a great example, Stephen. Yeah. It's just sort of like, oh God, we all know how ridiculous that guy is, right?
Yeah, they do that icon too sometimes. Like they'll put the icon under something you say that may be against social justice, and it's or whatever kind of ideology, and it's, hey buddy, stop. And it's always kind of like, oh, it's so dumb. I'm not even gonna bother because it's so silly. Which reminds me of something else I really liked in the beginning of letter 10, which was when the patient's starting to get to know some new people, and it's a nice couple, and they're rich, smart, superficially intellectual. And I loved that because that reminded me so much of the manner in which these people communicate and talk about their ideas and their beliefs and treat other people. And as I'm reading through Kendi's anti-racist book and hear other people talk about it when I'm interacting with them, the people that are superficially intellectual, they treat it as it's so wonderful and so, he's so deep and so thoughtful. And I can't help but imagine what, if anything else in their life, have they actually read. And I think there's so much around the white fragility and the anti-racism book, and a lot of those things that these people are reading and doing the work that makes them feel somewhat intellectual without actually doing any work into the thousands of books and people and things that have been written that are so much deeper in this century, much less any centuries preceding it.
There is something where he says about the sciences, and he says, they don't need to know all of it. They just need to know just enough to make them feel like they know it. And then they can, spew it out to other people and look intelligent and look smart. So I think that's right along the same lines. Like they just want the headline. I read that headline, right? Like I know that whole entire story.
I think that's almost similar to the worship of scientists over science generally. Like, well, I know what this group of scientists said, so I'm going to repeat they made some sounds with their mouths, and I'm going to repeat them to you, and now I sound like I know science.
Sheep.
Scientists as the Pope.
Infallible.
Yeah, it's like those memes online where it's like, imagine believing this opinion, like imagine not agreeing with the science. They like just assume that there's something wrong there, but then once you try to question it, like, well, why is that funny? There's no answer. So I think that's kind of a tell.
Yep.
Make them explain humor.
Carrie, weren't you doing something once you would like take their joke at face value? And it was really pissing me off.
Oh yeah. Well, I like sometimes when they use sarcasm ineffectively, when they just use it because they're lazy and it's the nearest tool and it's not the best tool. I like to do that. Like if there was that one guy in my comments who I can't remember, I had posted something about the lockdowns and he said, yeah, well, not being able to marry my sister is against my freedom. And I'm like, why do you want to marry your sister? And then we went back and forth for maybe 15 exchanges where he was like, I don't. I was trying to say, I was like, well, then why'd you say that? I feel like you just told me a little too much about you and your sister. It's like, sometimes just sincerity is a good tool to fight back against cheap sarcasm.
Yep.
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to say something earlier, Thomas. You were talking about you're being a little kid in church and your grandma was told not to bring you back because you were asking questions.
Terrible.
It's terrible.
About dinosaurs.
Well, it was during my confirmation classes where we're supposed to make sure that we understand what we believe and we're serious Christians. So I was asking, because I went to private school. I remember even at the time I wrote a report on evolution, and I still have it. I got a B+. But it was kind of controversial for me to do that because this was in the 80s, and I remember that was not totally accepted. Sorry, I've got a lot going on.
Yeah, it's okay.
Well, but I would ask questions about that, and eventually he asked my grandmother not to bring me back, and that was the last time I went to church.
That is awful. And something similar happened to me. It wasn't exactly the same, but I was told, I did ask a question once about people in other countries who what if they haven't heard the name of Jesus? And then I was told that was the devil putting questions in my head, which was basically like, don't ask those questions. And then I started wondering what questions are from the devil and which ones are not. And so it really, the reason I bring it up is that I think that's so awful. But I also see that repeated in that's another thing I started to notice about social justice while I was in it was, oh, wait, you're making me feel the way my Sunday school teacher made me feel that time, where I'm not allowed to ask questions, that it's evil to ask questions, or it's my privilege to ask questions, or that's your privilege. That's the devil. It's the same thing.
Yeah,
it's like, don't
that's
question
the
us.
religious aspect of social justice. That's all I'm saying.
I like to, when people do that sort of thing, like you say, well, give me a list. Like, don't make me figure out what the wrong questions are by trial and error. Like, you give me a list of all the questions I'm not allowed to ask or think of. Like, force them to try to make a list. They won't do it. No one ever does that.
Yeah, I think, well, if something's true, it can stand up against any questions, right? So like, if they're not allowing you to ask questions, and that's, do they really believe it's true? So that's what I think is, like, if they do that in church, that's so harmful, because I mean, like, I'm a Christian, but I believe it's true. So I'm not like scared of questions. So I don't know why someone would do that.
Yeah. To ask it that way, it's a little bit of what the technique Carrie was talking about with sarcasm, is you're just taking it at face value and you say, oh, okay, I understand. I'm not allowed to think or ask about these things. Give me a list of them. Like the George Carlin joke, when the mom hits him upside the head and said, for saying a bad word, like, well, Mom, give me a list. Like, don't make me figure this out.
Okay. Any other final thoughts?
I will say that I just so Carter isn't the only person there. I thought the book was okay. I wasn't as passionate about it as he was, but I did also think that it was kind of boring. I think what helped was listening to the John Cleese audiobook version. And I thought, if you're going to read it, or if you want to listen to it, listen to his version, because he just made it so there were a couple of chapters that were missing from where I listened to, I think because it was abridged or something. But so I had to listen to someone else reading those chapters. And I was like, oh, I don't really like the way that they tried to make this character, like the way Screwtape was just kind of more serious or demonic. And John Cleese just kind of had this, I don't know. I thought he did a great job of just kind of bringing this, frivolous side of a demon too. I'm like, oh, I like this aspect of it, rather than it just being like, you're a scary demon. Like, no, he turns into a centipede at one point. So like, yeah, it's going to be kind
awesome.
Of silly.
When he starts yelling in the audio and he starts screaming.
Because at first I was like, what's happening? Yeah. But so I think that really helped me out. Otherwise, if I were just reading it, I think it would have been a little bit more difficult for me to get through. Just because I'm like, I get the ideas that it's trying to convey, but then it's kind of like, all right, I've kind of heard these general things before, but an audiobook version with John Cleese. That's, oh, whoops, I probably shouldn't do that sign, huh?
That helped me a lot too. I was thinking that if I tried to sit on the couch and read that, I probably would have fallen asleep.
That's what I tried to do.
I also learned to not listen in the morning, which I often do with podcasts. Like, I'll lay in bed for an hour and listen to something, like I would fall asleep. So from this conversation, I got two different pieces I want to go back and re-listen to, because I don't remember them and maybe I fell asleep. I don't know. And also I had the one that you had, Beverly, that had a couple chapters missing. And it just says in the YouTube playlist, oh, these chapters aren't there.
Right. They're omitted.
What is this?
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I didn't really feel like going and finding them. I just continued on. So maybe that's part of the stuff I missed. I didn't bother to go find the 3 missing ones. So I think I will listen down. I will say one more thing. I found this book club way more interesting, and I got more out of it than actually reading the book. So I'm glad I read the books that I could hear all you said during the book club.
Yeah, it was good disagreeableness, and that made it fun.
Yeah.
Yes.
If everybody agreed on it, then the whole book club would be boring. Totally boring. Like, I don't want to participate in a 12 panel of Carters.
Yes, man.
No one does. One, maybe too many. All right. Well, look, on that note, everyone, thank you for joining, and thank everyone in chat for joining. And next book club is, I don't even remember when it is, sometime in November. Wait, I'll pull it up so that I can give you real information. The next book club is
right before Thanksgiving. Yeah,
I want to say the 22nd, but it's not showing up on my calendar. But it's the 22nd, and it is the Management of Savagery by Max Blumenthal, which Carrie is holding up, but you can't see. And we'll do our next book club then, and we'll see you. Carrie and I will see you tomorrow for Covfefe break. So thanks again for joining. Thanks for the few super chats that came through, and we will see you next time. Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, we have a deep content library that includes interviews with everyone from Mike Cernovich to Megan Murphy, so go check it out. If you'd like to see more, please consider supporting the show by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on all the major social media platforms, at least for now, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space chat on Telegram. See you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized by the Cathedral. Pay no attention to it. For your protection, the following co-conspirators have been unpersoned and marked for cancellation. Please avoid any contact with these individuals. I have calculated a 97.7% chance that Jack Dorsey would ban these people. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. All counter-narratives have been deemed harmful and will be suppressed for your own safety. Computer voice Curtis, never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.